guess fusion energy is something I'm passionate about. And I came to that because I was a trustee of the Nature Conservancy in Maine, and we did an exercise which sort of said, can you do renewable, these things like that, and can we get rid of the climate problem? And it turned out that the numbers said we couldn't, and go through that and why that's true. So I said, and at the time I was only something like 69 years old. And I said, well, nobody reads my papers anymore, sort of thing. That's all past. I want to get involved in something that really matters before I die or before my Parkinson's or something like that renders me unable. And so that's fusion energy. So that's what we're going to talk about, the why, the what, and some very exciting things are going on right now.
Excuse me, can people hear him in the back of the room?
Can you hear me back there?
Yeah.
I'm pretty loud. So, that's where I came to. Now, my PhD happens to be in physiology. I teach guts and glands to medical students. But on the other hand, I built a cyclotron in high school, won the Westinghouse contest way back when. And so I've always done physics, and even when I was doing physiology, I was doing electron probe microanalysis. So I was staying with the physics type of hardware for doing that. So I guess that's something gives you a little bit of a hint as to where it comes from. It also tells you how old I was 10 years ago. So, and well, you can do the test of whether I've slipped off the far edge yet. But I worry about that, as we all do.
You're not going to be evaluated.
I will, because the door is open.
As an anecdote, as a graduate student, I invested in KMS Fusion in Ann Arbor, and Kip Siegel said, a few years from now, you will make a lot of money.
Well, that's right. KMS was doing accelerator fusion, and the trouble is that if you do it one particle at a time, it's hard to get that energy. But it was a real effort that was done. So let's begin to talk about this. Fusion soon enough to make a difference. Now that's fundamental. You know, as you said, you talked about it a long time ago. But we got a climate problem, an energy problem in the world, and it makes this arguably, or even beyond argument, the single most important thing that science and the country ought to be doing right now and could be doing. But everybody knows all about these things, right? We know it's the ultimate energy source, right? You know that. But you know it's 50 years in the future, it always was, always will be, right? And anyway, we got so much renewables that what do we need this for if it's hard? Okay. Now, two of those things are false. Right? First is true, it is the ultimate energy source, but it's no longer 50 years in the future, and renewables can't make it if you do real numbers. So let's see. Why fusion? Okay. These are things that you all pretty much know, but you don't know the detail of the why. There's no greenhouse gas, no chain reaction, no meltdown. There's no long-life radioactive waste. There's no plutonium to make bombs with as waste thing, and it's forever. Now, it's not virtually inexhaustible. There's enough deuterium in a cubic mile of seawater to feed all the world's energy needs for a year. There are only 128 cubic miles of seawater. 128 cubic miles of seawater. So there's only enough deuterium there for 100 million years, plus or minus. Okay? That's not forever, if you're precise. Okay? But maybe, since that human evolution hasn't been 100 million years, that takes you back to the dinosaurs. So it's almost forever. What do? You take, everybody remember their basic stuff? The proton and the electron running around it. Okay. Deuterium is a proton and a neutron, and tritium is a proton and two neutrons. Right? Deuterium isn't radioactive. Tritium is slightly radioactive. It has about a 12-year half-life. So if you put a triton and a deuteron together, bingo, you've got just enough neutrons to make a helium. Right? That's two protons, two neutrons, and you got an extra neutron. And the extra neutron flies away at very high speed and carries energy. And so you can run it Well, how do you make a cycle that works with that? Well, I can start out and say, all right, I'm going to take deuterium and tritium, and I'm going to put them together, and I'm going to get energy out. And I get an extra neutron from that, and I can use that if I have some lithium in my system. I can in fact use the lithium to provide me with some other nuclei. It'll make tritium and helium, and so you keep on going around this way. You get the energy out, and you use lithium, all right, as a source to make your tritium as you need it, which is really neat because the amount of tritium that you have is negligibly large compared, for example, to the amount that floats around in a conventional nuclear power plant. And you can just cycle it around, and in your lithium battery in there, there's enough lithium to run Boston for a year. No, wrong, only a week. Okay. So this is a cycle you can run. And by the way, I should note that I have been stealing slides from MIT, from the Plasma Science and Fusion Center, and I go over there and I say, what do you got for good slides? And they give me their presentations, and then I cobble them together to talk to you. But I don't actually work there. I'm just a kibitzer. Is that the right pronunciation?
Yes.
Okay, I got no cards on the table, but I look over people's shoulders and I talk a lot.
Emphasis on the middle, kibitzer.
All right, we're gonna have a vote. How many vote for kibitzer? How many vote for kibitzer? Well, look around. I used to say kibitzer, and then I got corrected. So, yeah. So anyway, but that's what I do when I borrow these slides, and I'm very grateful. Okay. Now, how much is there, and how much energy do you get? If you were to burn hydrogen, make a flame until it makes steam, and from that, you know, boil water, run a turbine or something, well, you get about 4 million times as much energy from the fusion reaction as you would by burning a chemical reaction. So in a barrel of water, that's a petroleum-sized barrel of only 42 gallons, there's 3/4 of an ounce of heavy water. That's just water made with deuterium and oxygen instead of hydrogen and oxygen. Right? There's about 2 drops of that in every cup of water. Ordinary cup, right there, whatever you've been drinking it today. All right? That heavy water that's in that barrel has the same energy content as 13,000 gallons of oil if you do deuterons to deuterons, or 32,000 gallons of oil for a deuterium-tritium reaction. Yeah, same as if you just take the heavy water out of a barrel of water, 42 gallons of water, you can get the energy through fusion of 32,000 gallons of oil. Kind of impressive, right? And you can use lithium, and you can also do deuterium-deuterium or deuterium-tritium. Deuterium-tritium is easier, so that's why you do that one first. Right? And to give you these numbers, okay, let's burn coal. 2 million tons, 21,000 rail cars worth of coal equals 10,000 barrels of oil, 30 tons of uranium oxide in a fission reactor, okay? Or about half a ton, about 1,000 pounds of deuterium. Right? So this would seem to be a very appropriate thing to do, right? Let's get that energy, right? Straightforward. And as you say, 50 years ago, people knew all these numbers, right? But it hasn't happened yet. Meantime, the world is getting warmer. It's obvious. The fuel is cheap, water is cheap, plentiful, right? And the deuterium's in there. And all you gotta do is just squeeze the nuclei together. Right? Easy?
No.
Well, no, says somebody. I didn't let a physicist in. So, anyway, so I got 2 positively charged things, and I want them to get together really close. Forgive me? Really close together. Now, I don't mean, you know, a millimeter together. I don't mean 1,000th of a millimeter apart. I want them to get together as close as the diameter of an atomic nucleus. And they're both positively charged. Right? They generally don't want to do it. Right? Anybody ever seen those really good little magnets they use for earrings and so forth?
Yes.
You ever tried to put them together north to north? or the magnets that come in, used to come in disk drives. Okay? And you can't do it. You just cannot do it. So imagine I've got to somehow get two nuclei close enough together to fuse, and they don't want to do it. They want to bounce. They want to miss. Right? Now, is there anything that makes it work? Well, you could do it really, really fast. And so some of them, they aren't going to get deflected enough, and they'll merge. Or we make them very dense. Well, is there any system that actually does that? Yeah, it's called the sun. And think about it for a moment. All the fuel that we talk about is fusion fuel, right? All the renewable, right? Wind, solar, fusion reaction in the sun. Right? All the coal, oil, fossil fuel is from what? From once upon a time, from the sun. So all your renewables is still fusion energy, but it's come indirectly, right? Through the heat and radiation from the sun. The sun has a big plus, okay? It's big. So it's got lots of gravity. In the middle of the sun, it squeezes things together really, really hard. We can't do that. So the best you can do is make them go really, really fast. And most of the time they miss. So there's got to be a trick to deal with stuff that misses. Okay? Which we'll have to do that. And, oh, well, think about it. What do I mean by really, really fast? Everybody happy that heat, things that are hot, their atoms, their molecules are jiggling a lot, right? A lot of jiggle, a lot of temperature. And so if you get to somewhere between 100 million and 200 million degrees Celsius, okay, things will be going so fast that if they happen to get near each other, they could bounce into each other and fuse. That's hard to do, but it's there. And in fact, that's a lot hotter than the surface of the sun. It's a lot hotter than the core of the sun. It's a lot hotter than the solar corona, which is hotter than the sun itself. Right? But that's what you got to do if you want to do it without having the gravity of the sun push things together. So all you got to do is you got to have 100 million degrees, heat and squeeze, put it in some kind of a container, right? That's a problem, isn't it? 100 million degrees. Well, there's no container that I know of that will hold anything at 100 million degrees. But part of the problem is not just that it might melt the container, you can cool the stuff down, because the stuff is not going to be solid and lumpy. It's going to be like a plasma. It's going to be free nuclei. And so you got to sort of suspend them somehow. And so, well, there's your fundamental question, right? This is really hard to do. Why bother? Right? Renewables are coming so fast. Everything's going. You read about it in the paper. You know, solar shells have got cheap by a huge factor of something like 100 in the last few years. And wind and solar. How many people have read something that says we can do the world on 100% renewables? Well, we see it all the time, right? And there are big organizations who are saying we're going to run the world 100% on renewables. We can run 100% on renewables by 2050 and so forth. So maybe we ought to consider what the real numbers are. And this isn't directly fusion, but this is how I got involved, and the reason I want to get you involved. Right? Because if you don't use real numbers, then you're off in vapor land, right? So let's look at real numbers. Okay, this is world energy consumption as projected. All right, OECD countries, that's the developed world and the undeveloped world. This is us right about here, right now. 600 quadrillion BTUs a year. I'm going to tell you what a quad is. It's coming. 600 quadrillion, and you notice that that's going to go up from 600 to 700, 800 quadrillion BTU per year because of increased demand in the developing world. And they all want to have air conditioners like we do, and they want to drive cars like we got, and they want all those things. And it may not be going up as fast, but certainly going up. On the other hand, you look at the developed world, right? We're essentially flat. We're putting in LED light bulbs, we're driving some Priuses, we're insulating houses, and so forth, and we're flat. We're not growing. But look at the rest of the world, right? Well, I had to tell you what a quad was. Remember, we got 600 quads. Okay, how big is a quad? You can read it faster than I can tell it to you. Which number do you like the most? 600 quads per year, worldwide. All right, it's going up about 10 quads a year right now. So I like to think of a quad as the combined output of 33 1 billion watt power plants. That's a big nuke, a big coal-fired plant, something like that. But it would also be equal to 36 million tons of coal or 8 billion gallons of gas. It's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot. Right? It's a lot. So if you're using 600 quads, multiply 600 times 33, and multiply 600 times 8 billion, right? That's the world's energy demand. And there's the same slide again, that you already saw, okay? That's where we are now, we're around 300 in the developed world, it's going up. So what can you do about that? Well, okay, let's have renewables. Now renewables is growing. No question renewables is growing. Not only that, but in some places in the world some more fission power is going. But, so it's like, jeepers creepers. This is the fossil part. And here's the renewables, and let's say that the renewables keep on and they will double. Maybe they can more than double. In Germany, which is the poster child for renewables, they get, when the sun shines and the wind blows, they can get about 35 to 40% of their electricity from wind and solar. That's terrific, right? 35 to 40%, right? They've decided they don't like nuclear, fission nuclear, so they're sort of shutting that down. The net result is, oh, well, wait a minute, 35, 40% of their electricity, but what fraction is of their energy demand is electricity? Is electric? About 30%, 35%. So you get 35% of 35% when the sun shines and the wind blows. Well, can you multiply a third of a third? Get a ninth, right? Something on the order of 10, 15% of the energy demand that they can get when the sun shines and wind blows. And in fact, Germany has increased their imports of coal, the burning of coal. Actually, they're buying American coal, shipping it to Germany because they can get American coal cheaper, because nobody in America wants it anymore, cheaper than mining the coal in Germany and just carrying it 50 miles to their coal burning plant. But with the terrific involvement of renewables in Germany, you're getting something around 10% of their net energy.
It's costing them about 3 times as much than we pay in the US for a unit of electricity at that rate, so they're heavily subsidizing.
So that's what pays for shipping and so forth. Well,
they're also cutting down forests to dig out more coal.
so hooray for renewables, right? When I was with the exercise with the Nature Conservancy, tree huggers, all of us, and the first thing to do, obviously, was we were going to do reforestation. Right? That's how we're going to solve the CO2 problem. So if you want to cut growth, cut growth down by 10%, folks at Princeton worked this out. I want to cut energy growth by 10%. What area do I have to reforest? This is part of something called the wedge game developed at Princeton, and you can get it on the web. Okay. They put real numbers on these things. What area do you reforest to cut growth by 10%?
Brazil.
World. The whole world.
Okay. Not the whole world, but
Brazil.
well, that's pretty. The entire continental United States. Okay. Now, no score if you put trees where there's already trees. Right, you have to reforest. Right, you have to stop deforestation.
Question.
Yeah.
Are we considering the oceans to also be a carbon sink due to algae?
There are proposals to try and increase the amount of uptake of carbon in the ocean, for example, by seeding with iron and so forth. Right, and that's a potential pretty big sink that you could use for CO2. And the However, at the same time, we wind up acidifying the ocean. And, you know, that's the big negative to geoengineering. You know, we're going to put sulfate up in the upper atmosphere, right? We're going to make a nice reflector up there. So you put the reflector up there, you can't grow wheat in North Dakota anymore. But also, you keep the CO2 in, and now we acidify the ocean. And that has a lot
Well,
of...
some people have suggested maybe spending more money on research on burning clean coal. I don't know if there's ever any
Yeah,
serious discussion of that.
The folks at Princeton, actually, I was talking to Steve Pacala down in Princeton who worked out the wedge game, and he said, well, if we wanted to actually just collect the CO2 from burning coal, and we use that as our approach, he said, and then we're going to inject this underground, right, so as to put it someplace where presumably it would stay there, right? And he said, well, it's going to leak or something. He said, your problem is the blister. He said it actually could lift the surface of America by about an inch or two. With the CO2.
So it counteracts the rise.
So this is a problem. You know, if you're going to burn up CO2, and other people say, let's capture the CO2 directly from the air.
Oh,
Okay? All right, and you see the plan, and it's a great plan by thoughtful people who say we have this system which is going to collect CO2 from the atmosphere and sequester it again. And basically that means unburn it, make coal, right? But to do that, you have to put in as much energy as you got to put it there to start with, right? That's lots. Okay. So here we are, we got renewables, and let's say we do this. Let's suppose we ginned up renewables so big that you could do all of your requirement for growth, all of it with renewables. And that's really wonderful, and it's conceivable. But what happened to this line here? Did it change? Not significantly. So if you do all of energy growth and demand worldwide, right, you still haven't stopped the CO2 production from that base amount, which is 400 watts worth of fossil fuel.
So that's the baseline, right? What about storage technology like batteries and so on? Does that affect?
That's how you get to do that much
Okay.
renewables, all right? Because the renewables are Germany's problem, you know, when the
Yeah.
wind blows and the sun shines, all right? You also got to make solar panels and you got to make batteries, which is interesting. Up to a few years ago, was that it took for an American-made solar panel took about 2 years to pay back in CO2 what it cost to make the solar panel. The Chinese-made solar panel took about 4 years to pay back because they were burning coal to make the electricity, to make the aluminum, et cetera, to make the solar panel. So it took you 4 years to get it back, but it's still worthwhile. Okay? Very important to do. But you can see that this is a big challenge. Now, I went out to the Sierra Club, and I had all these numbers, and I was loaded for bear, and I had all my papers out in San Francisco, and I said, you know, Jesse Simon, the chief of staff up there, I said, you can't do what you say in your journal and so forth, that you're going to make the whole world work on renewables. And I expected a fight. I was ready. He said, oh, we know that. We know that. I said, you mean, so the Sierra Club is out there lying to its members? Huh? Why are you doing that? Well, it's great. It energizes our base to do more than they would do otherwise.
Works for Trump?
Trump,
Doesn't matter again.
And that was actually pre the current president.
Must be true.
So, but on the other hand, there's this huge movement, and it's a good movement to do things with renewables. But can you get there? And the answer is, you can't get to zero CO2, which you all know is what the number has to be. So, I mean, there, for example, all right, is a fairly big 40 megawatt solar plant. It was put on a lake, right? Because that gave you a big, nice, flat surface. Okay? Now there have been a couple of near gigawatt, near billion watt solar panels, solar arrays, but that looks pretty big, right? And that's 40 megawatt. You need 25 of these to make 1 gigawatt. That's a billion watts. And you need 800 things that big to make 1 Q. And you gotta replace 400 Q of fossil fuel. That's a challenge. We should work on it, it's very important to do, right? And in a very short time, until fusion comes on the line, you're doing everything you can. So, right, it's really hard. So, what I describe as the energy gap. Here, if we're gonna get down to no fossil, and we make renewables, do all of growth, which is here's where we are now, this is the amount. You see how much more renewables we gotta use? It's a lot. That's only the 2040, right? We have what I call the energy gap, and you gotta fill that energy gap somehow. You're gonna get there. And now we come up empty-handed, right? What have we got that's gonna be CO2 free that can provide the energy that the world wants, right? And of course you can do it with more fission plants, but that's politically very difficult because people don't like it. Would you like to have a fission plant nearer to you than Plymouth? By the way, you know where the nearest Fukushima model fission power plant is? You know where it is? Plymouth.
I'd rather have that than a coal burning plant near me.
Well, depends on whether you're upwind or downwind. All right. Well, people aren't dying in general because of fission plants, all right? They don't make CO2, they do make energy, it's a known technology, but people still don't like it, all right? And you've got a waste problem and so forth. So, politically, fission plants are dead, I'm assured, in the Congress, because the government gives you loans to build it, they give you money to insure it, okay? They provide the fuel, they provide the engineering through grants, and people still don't want to build it. And it costs an awful lot to take them apart. So, well, you thought I was never going to get there, right? Okay. Here is fusion going to be relevant? Well, you've got to scale rapidly. Wind and solar, you scale up some fission, you scale up some hydro, all right? You're going to phase out natural gas and coal, you got this big thing here, this gap. Somewhere you got to do. Now this is terawatts instead of watts, but you got a big challenge. And now the question is, can you do it? And you see, you got to start scaling it up, starting commercially in 2040. If you want to have a chance of doing something, and we can't hit the timing, things won't go well. Greenland ice cap melts, the ocean goes up 6 meters. 20 feet. Okay? So figure the effect on places. All right. Now a bunch of computer people here, right? Everybody knows what Moore's law is. Well, progress in fusion has gone up much more rapidly than Moore's law. There's been huge progress in making more efficient, more complete, more powerful fusion machines. Notice this is a log scale. It covers a lot of range. In how long? 30 years. Okay, 40 years. And at the moment it's sort of stalled because, well, government sort of say, well, it's 50 years away, always will be, always was. But if you think about computer power, now look at magnetic fusion energy. What do we mean by magnetic? Well, magnetic gets you to how do you take and make a fusion reaction so it doesn't melt the container or get cooled by the container. Well, remember I told you that here's these things and they want to go flying past each other. We can make them hot, right? But they're going to miss. All the time they're going to miss. Every time they're going to miss. Very small percentage of times will they hit and fuse. And if they just go flying by and wind up in Cambridge, it doesn't do you any good. So you want to make a circular container if you can. So when they miss, they come around again and they'll find somebody else and they'll interact. Give you lots of chances to interact. And that's donut-shaped thing that contains the orbits you get by magnetic fields. And magnetic fields will squeeze the plasma down. Uh-oh, plasma, new words. Right? You take a gas, something consisting of hydrogen gas, protons. It's got electrons. And if you strip off the electrons, you got just protons. Right? And they're positively charged. That means that, in fact, they will be influenced as a moving charge in a magnetic field has a force put on it. Just like the voice coil in your loudspeaker, you know, you got that powerful magnet in the loudspeaker, and you have this little coil of wire, and the electrons in that coil of wire get pushed by the magnetic field. So you can keep them squeezed. And so you've got this chamber here, and it goes around, and if you keep squeezing it, it won't touch the wall. And in fact, it's not hard to get 100 million degrees in that. The challenge is to get your 100 million degrees and keep the squeeze on without using more power than you get out from the fusion reaction you want to do. So if you got the confinement, this is a picture from over at MIT, and you don't see the hot part of the plasma in here. You only see the cold part, because the hot part is so hot, it's not red, it's not yellow, it's not blue. It radiates in X-ray wavelengths. Right? It's so hot that the color is X-rays. So you only see the cold spots. But you can have the plasma contained in the middle. It consists of atomic nuclei. They're charged, positively charged. Remember those deuterons and tritons, or deuterons and deuterons? They're positively charged, and they want to go past each other. And we keep them squeezed.
Now, is this field all going around in the same direction, or is it two groups going in opposite?
Well, they all got to go in the same direction, the same field, okay? Because if they're similarly charged, okay? But it turns out that they don't fly in straight lines anyway, right? What they do is, and this is where we always lose the audience, if you have a magnetic field line, most people are uncomfortable with magnetic field lines. I'm going to take you back to elementary school or middle school. Remember, you put a magnet down, you sprinkled iron filings on it?
Yep.
And you saw those lines between the north and south that the iron filings made? That's a line of magnetic field. And the particles actually, when they're steered this way, they orbit around the lines. You and I can't see the lines, we can't picture the lines. They're there, and the particles are orbiting around, and they're chasing each other around, and they interact. And the system pulses also, because the thing works in a sense like a generator. You have a pulsing central field, and then that's one turn, and then the plasma makes another turn. It gets hairy. Right. And once you got that right, if I had my plasma in here, then the next thing to do is I need to collect the heat from that, make steam with it, right? Run a turbine, and I tell them, don't use this in the slide, because that means efficient plant to everybody, right? Show that you're going to get rid of your extra heat, but everybody remembers your physics and the Carnot efficiency and so forth. You got to work between a high temperature and low temperature. It's the heat flowing from a high temperature to a low temperature that lets you extract the heat from it. So you got to have a cool side and a hot side. But that's just conventional. This is, in fact, the fusion part you're talking about is just a fusion furnace. Another heat source. Everything else is conventional.
How much does this heat up the world?
Not any more than any other thing, but yes, there is a calculation that shows that just the inefficiency of power plants inevitably will warm up the world, but it's a tiny fraction of what the solar energy does as trapped by CO2, for example. Well, I've seen a number for it. There are some plans for making fusion machines which directly generate electricity without Carnot inefficiency, if you will. Right? But nobody's made that work, but it makes for great writing at the moment. But the way we make fusion energy in 2100 will be different, just as our airplanes don't look like the Wright brothers airplane. Right? So, but in that case, the idea is it's pretty simple. And containment structure, but you don't need a particular containment structure. The biggest fusion machine that people are building, which is not a net energy machine, they did a calculation post-Fukushima, and they said, what happens if you shut off everything, all the coolant pumps on, shut everything off, right? And what temperature will it go to? Well, it turns out it goes to a temperature below freezing. Why? Because the coils are made out of superconducting material, which you have to keep cool to liquid helium temperature. The net temperature of the whole machine is below 0 Celsius. Anyway, nice thing to know. So there is a machine over at MIT, and it's called a Tokamak, a donut-shaped fusion confinement machine. It's called the Tokamak, which I am assured does not mean Duncan in Russian. I don't know what it does mean. I don't know.
Big current.
What?
Big current.
Big current, is that right?
Toka is current, and Mach, I think, just means big current.
Well, there it is. Thank you. No, no, and it's flowing, the current's flowing around in there, all right? Thousands and thousands of amperes flowing in that plasma. And that machine over at MIT, about 2 years ago, achieved the highest confinement of a magnetic field of plasma. The highest magnetic confinement number in the world, all right, was achieved with that machine. And then the Department of Energy pulled the funding. So that machine's not operating at the moment. Right? But the folks at MIT are going to more exciting things.
Why did DOE pull the funding?
There's more than one way to describe artificial intelligence.
Artificial stupidity. No, this is human stupidity, it sounds like.
Well, there are some competing ways to do this.
So
I mean, they're supporting the one on the West Coast. I mean, they're supporting.
they're putting some money into the D3D machine, that's right, but this one has the highest magnetic field of anything in the
also
world.
Still putting money into ITER.
And the ITER, we'll talk about the ITER, okay. So, but that's, I gotta put a person in there. Well, that's a railing that a person won't fall over, I keep it scared.
And there are the stairs there, so you don't get a judgment.
So, yeah, and the stairs. So, it's not very big, but it was a very interesting and worthwhile machine. Okay, you asked me about ITER. Right? There's a machine being built in France, right, by a consortium of sort of the world. The US is 9% of this project, right up there with India. And this is going to be the fusion machine. The people building it say this is the only hope for fusion in this century. Right? The guy who's running it is a Frenchman whose name is spelled B-I-G-O-T. Bigot. Anyway, there's a person. Right there. And here are magnet coils around it, and they are in fact superconducting magnets. Why does it have to be a superconducting magnet? Because you just can't afford the electricity to run that with a copper coil. Right? So it's a superconductor. It's an earlier kind of superconductor called niobium tin. And it's big. Because with the available magnetic field, if you wanted to get net energy, you had to make it very, very big because you couldn't squeeze very much. And it's being built.
Is
See
that
the price?
Is that the same Tokamak design?
Same fundamental
That's a
design.
Tokamak.
Yep, it's a total. But see the price?
Is there a conventional power plant next door to feed the magnets?
Well, for this, they actually had to run big power lines into that part of France to get it going. And, this was international dues that, you know, the French didn't get to be in charge of it to start with. The Japanese were put in charge of it to start with, so the French insisted that it be built in France, in an underdeveloped area of France, that they had to build new roads, new power lines, everything, you know, with the money. Okay, so that's ITER, I-T-E-R, International Tokamak Experimental Reactor, I think. But somebody invented some Latin that supposedly means the way.
Is that expected to actually produce useful power that can be sold?
No, no. It's going to be 500 megawatts for a few minutes, all right? And then you have to let it cool down because it doesn't have a cooling system that's built to take the energy out. No, it's just a physics experiment. Right? Okay, this shows you how big it is. See, people? Okay, that's one of the coils on the side. It's big. And it's because the kind of superconductor that is used to make these coils, right, can't make enough magnetic field to let you squeeze down tighter, so it's big. So, aha, the plot thickens. Right? This is Professor White at MIT, who's in charge of the MIT program, and the Sorbonne, and they're holding in their hands some newer superconducting material. And I'll pass these pieces around. These pieces of a new superconducting ribbon. And to give you an idea, inside here, there's a layer which is 1/1000th of a millimeter thick. And in that little tiny ribbon, you can easily carry 500 amperes with no heat and no resistance. What's superconducting mean? It doesn't mean it has a little bit of resistance. It means it has no resistance. Not a skosh. No resistance. Bend that into a complete circle and start a current flowing in it, it will flow forever. The problem is,
What's the transition temperature of this stuff?
I'll tell you, okay? It superconducts at liquid nitrogen temperature,
Okay.
right? This little strip will carry 5,000 amperes.
Wow.
Right. Right. And the reason that there's a limit on it is that superconductors are limited by magnetic field, and its own magnetic field that's making that ultimately will keep it stop it from superconducting.
What is the substance that is superconducting at liquid nitrogen?
Yeah.
What is it?
Okay, it's yttrium barium copper oxide, YbCO. And that's not a brand new material. In fact, I got some freebies to hand out here. There's some tiny fragments of stuff that you don't have the fun of wrapping around. So you'll have to fight over these. There's a few more people than there are freebies. But these are the folks at MIT. You guys in the back, you always on the bad end, actually. You know, fight for it. And what's in there in the middle of it is 1/1000th of a millimeter of YbCO. Okay? And it's not to scale because it's copper on the outside and so forth. There's a substrate of basically steel. And these buffers, and it's, if you do semiconductors, it's epitaxially vapor deposited on top of the appropriate substrate. And well, this particular piece was tested at 500 amperes at 77 degrees. That's liquid nitrogen temperature, right? And the neat thing is you can bend it, which you can't do with the older superconductors because it's so thin. It's still so ceramic. But you can wind it in coils, and I'll tell you a really neat thing. Think about this one. If I wind a coil with this stuff, it's copper on the outside, right? And I wind it up just as tight as I want, and I want to make a coil with it, I don't put any insulation on the wire. Why not?
Copper is an insulator.
Because what?
Copper is an insulator at those temperatures.
Compared to zero resistance, right? Anything is infinite. So in fact, you can wind it up just as tight as you want. You don't have to insulate the turns from each other because when it's superconducting, the copper is the insulator. Only an insulator, perfect insulator. Fun. And several different companies are now making this stuff, and what do they use it for? They're making magnets for MRI machines, which gives them a market now, which is bigger than the fusion market. On the other hand, over at MIT now, they've got kilometers of this stuff. Okay. It's flexible, and it's got the acetal layer in the middle, and the steel substrate makes it very strong. And here, okay, you want the fancy stuff? You're all techies. Happy you're techies. Well, may I? Yeah. Good point. All right. This is the amount of magnetic field you got. And here is the kind of material that's used for heater. And here is that material you got in your hand. And you can see that, in fact, it handles much more current, all right, in a given magnetic field than does the other stuff. Okay? And that's really profound. It makes a profound difference because it says that you can get a lot of magnetic field. There's more magnetic field with this stuff than you could otherwise. And so, does that matter? Well, B is magnetic field strength. Don't ask me why it's B. Right? The electrical people tell me why I is current. I don't know. Okay. But anyway, power density in the Tokamak goes as magnetic field to the 4th power. Okay. And with this stuff, you can get twice as much magnetic field. So you can get a power density which is 16 times as much. And that's what the folks at MIT seized upon. And they said, wait a minute, this changes the whole game. changes the whole game. Not $35 billion in 35 years for ITER, right? But how about smaller? That's ITER over here. Same science, same Tokamak thing, but MIT came up with what they called ARC, same power level. That's a design, a conceptual design for affordable, robust, and compact. 500 megawatts. Either one, only this one can run continuously and either can't in that design.
Does the 200 megawatts mean that it's actually producing power?
Say again?
The 200 megawatts there, does that mean it's actually producing power?
No, that's right. Yeah, that's a design that would produce, put 200 megawatts into the grid. Right? And so now you can make little ones. So ITER's way up here with a low magnetic field and a huge size in meters. And now if you can get your magnetic field high, you can get way down here, you get a functioning machine. That's where the designs are going. And it's what they call SPARC. And ARC was affordable, robust, and compact. And SPARC means soonest possible or smallest possible. Okay? All right? And so what do you got? All right? Anybody poked around in the newspapers recently? And nuclear fusion on the brink of being realized says carbon-free fusion power could be on the grid in 15 years. That was March 18th. All right? I go and beat on them. I say, damn it, in 15 years I'll be 93. Right. I don't like that idea. I say, no, 15 years is way too long. We got to do this sooner because the world needs it. So I go in there and I say, you can not work in your lab or your engineering facility on Christmas. You can have Christmas off. Right? Because why? Because what's being done by these people in this lab is the most fundamental problem of civilization at the present time. And also the most fundamental problem for the survival of species in general on this planet, is to solve that energy problem. All right? And so they've got SPARC come along, and it says, all right, proven science, tokamaks are well understood, you can make it smaller. High temperature superconducting magnets, make it smaller, all right? And what they're aiming for at MIT is what you call a Kitty Hawk moment. Until people flew in 1903, everybody knew you couldn't fly, right? Wright brothers didn't get any money. All right? And I said, all right, didn't I? Okay. Wright brothers couldn't get money,
You know.
and then they flew. And then everybody, by 1906, was building airplanes. So MIT is not proposing to sort of solve the world's problems in fusion, although they're working on intellectual property for that. But they say this can be built in 5 years with an energy gain of 50 megawatts. One of the problems is you got so much power in these things. You can't make it really smaller, because if you can get 50 megawatts in a thing that big, how do you get the energy out through the wall? You know, how many megawatts per square meter can you move through the wall? Huh? So when people say, can we put one of these things in the car? And so I say, well, that's a technology that I don't know about right now, but if you want to do it with fusing plasmas in the ordinary sense, the energy level is just too high. You've got to make it a certain size just to move it out, get it across the wall. And they really try to do this. Now they say it can be built in 5 years. It's entirely resources limited. They're talking about 7 years. 7 years, I say, is too long. I go in and talk to them. I say, do you realize your project has slipped 2 years in just 12 months? No. And they say, well, we can't, we don't have enough money. If you know Bloomberg, he's going to be talking at MIT in their graduation. All right, tell him he could have his name on it. Immortality is hard to buy nowadays, right? But he'd get it, or you would. This is the magnet structure for ITER, and this is the magnet structure for SPARC. SPARC is, in fact, going to make net energy. Right?
What's the cost difference?
Say again?
Cost?
Cost? Probably all in for the first one, something on the order of $400 million. But beyond that, of course, that's, you know, your first prototype. So, compared with 35 billion for that, and this would produce net energy. And that's what it looks like.
What does it cost to get the fuel to run?
Oh, the fuel to run?
The hydrogen.
How much do I need? I need a pinch, right? I just need a pinch. All right, a little bit. All right. You can get 50 megawatts out of this for the amount of fuel that weight of a grain of salt. Yes.
Have they come up with some numbers as far as what the cost will be to consumers?
Yeah. In fact, a study was commissioned, and it turns out to be directly comparable with a new natural gas plant. So, but you know, you have zero fuel cost, fundamentally. So, question in the back.
Yeah, in terms of the size of the output, how does it plug into the existing grids?
Well, a 500 megawatt is a very convenient size. Okay, so not a billion watts. So 200 to 500 megawatts is pretty good. The interesting thing is, you want to put one at Lexington.
In Plymouth, you got all the wires
Right.
coming in already.
It's not, you know, it doesn't have any meltdown, it doesn't have any chain reaction. Okay? It doesn't have a whole lot of radioactive stuff in it. In fact, the chamber will become radioactive, and you have to stay away from it for 100 years total, period. Then you can live on it. Right? So you can put it here. You can have distributed power, and you don't have to have power lines coming. If you're going to have a big solar plant, you're going to have a lot of power lines coming across country. Yeah.
I would think the venture capital people would be very interested in funding this. It blows my mind that with all of the money that's floating around out there, that funding could not be found for the trivial amount of money that you're talking about here.
I've spent a good hunk of my life, the last 20 years, trying to talk to venture capitalists and people, money people. And what are they interested in? They're interested in short-term exit strategy.
Yep.
And if you say 5 years to proof of principle, they say, come back and see me in 4.
Yeah.
It's been very, very hard. But you know who's putting the money in for this right now? The Italian oil conglomerate Eni.
Yes.
And the top management at Eni said the future is not in petroleum, the future is going to be here. And they put in $70 million right now. But Bill Gates and the Breakthrough Collaborative have been very slow to come on board.
I thought there were some hedge funds though putting money into this.
Well, I'll touch that right away, because, well, I just stuck in a couple of things. It turns out that, you know, it's kind of easy, right? Like, so I say, you build a chamber, you put a magnafilm around it, okay? But when you begin to add it up and say, how are you actually going to do it, all right? There's a lot of stuff to think about, which the MIT group is thinking about. And this is you're not supposed to be able to read this, okay? But this is just what they call diagnostics, a terrible term. It means disease to us. But it's measurement and control. And look at all these names. These are all people working at MIT, right? Doctoral level people who are working on how do you measure, how do you see what the control is for this machine. So we just had the Christmas party, and they had 3 or 4 times as many people as in this room, all part of the big team, working to make this happen in a short time. But there's other people. Hey, Tri-Alpha Energy has raised, I don't know, $400 or $500 million for a system that they say will not require any, would not be producing neutrons and getting energy out in the form of high energy neutrons. And they've raised a fair amount of money. But they are, compared to the group at MIT in terms of time and temperature, right, they're 4 orders of magnitude back. Doesn't mean that that might not work in the future. Lockheed Martin came up with something which is a variant on this magnetic mirror model. They went public and they said, well, you can give you 500 megawatts in the back of a pickup truck. Well, get you a little hinky about that. And we can't find out what they're doing. Right? Nobody seems to know. General Fusion, they're up in Canada. They're very active in public relations. They're real good at public relations. And they say, well, we want to implode stuff, so let's hammer on it. so they proposed that little fuel pellet, which will go down the middle of a sphere of molten lead, which will be spinning so fast enough so there'll be a cavity down the middle. And that will snugly just about fit on the fuel pellet, which will be, I don't know, the size of not as big as a BB anyway. And then they got all these air hammers all around the outside, and they're all gonna go wham at the same moment. It's fun to watch their presentation in a meeting, because they test it out by taking their little sample and they take it out into a quarry and they set off dynamite around it. So they say, here's our next experiment. Wham! But they haven't got it diffused yet with that. But they're raising quite a lot of money, and they're Canadian. All right, so the Canadians like them. Now that's General Fusion. And there's another company called Fuse. In fact, what's going on, there's a whole nascent industry now. And you sort of say, well, has this finally got to the point where people are now getting in there? Venture capital is getting in. And the answer is yes. All right? So TAE, Tokamak Energy, I visited them, Phoenix Nuclear, Hydrogen Fusion, General Fusion up there. All right? And a whole bunch of these people, they're building stuff, they're telling stories to investors, and it's like any other high-risk thing. They sort of say, well, there's a chance we could make it, and if so, we're all going to get rich or something like that.
And these are all based on YBCO?
No.
This conductor you sent around?
No. For example, Tri-Alpha uses electrical focusing, for example. General Fusion just drops something down the middle and then fires pellets at it. They may
How about laser?
Say again?
Laser, Livermore.
Okay, lasers, yeah. Lawrence Livermore lab spent $3.5 billion in the nuclear weapons budget. And they build the world's most powerful lasers, many, many lasers, and they're all aimed at the same thing. I don't have the picture there. And the idea was to simulate the way a hydrogen bomb works. So the way a hydrogen bomb works, you start out with a fission explosion, and then you focus the X-rays from that onto the tritium and deuterium target. Well, in any case, you have a thing like, imagine a little kind of sphere from the middle of a grain of rice. And they have a huge machine that aims all the laser beams at it, but they don't directly hit the pellet. They go to a little cylinder, and the laser beams come into the cylinder, and they trigger X-rays from the wall of the cylinder, which are then supposed to compress the pellet. All right. And 6 years ago, they were confident that they were going to do it, and it hasn't worked yet. And the problem is, of course, how do you go from something that they can do once in a week to something which has to work 10 times a second? You got to make enough targets. So they've kind of slipped off the fusion energy, but they were very big on it 5 or 6 years ago.
How do they know if they simulate a hydrogen bomb that won't explode?
Oh, well, the thing will explode.
It will.
That little tiny fuel pellet will explode, but the chamber is big enough it's not going to take it apart. Right, probably make some smoke, which will get in the way of the laser beams, but that's another story. Right, but these are, it's important to realize, these are serious and thoughtful people working hard with investor money to try to get there before MIT does. Right? And there's even now an industry association, right? Different companies all involved. Fuse is right up in Canada, and they said, we're going to have enough money in Canada, we're just simply going to hire all the good talent and bring it up to Canada, put them all in Vancouver, and we're going to beat everybody. Right? There is, sad to say, quite a number of people working in fusion whose hair is the same color as mine, and whose attitude is that they want to retire quietly, fondly remembered by their graduate students. Right? And when you say, we want you to build something that works, they don't want to do that. Right? And the Department of Energy doesn't want to do that either, interestingly. Their representative came to a fusion meeting, and I asked, well, what is your product? What do you expect to get from the research money you're putting into fusion? And they said, papers, technical papers. I said, well, are you interested in a machine that works right? No, our product is papers. That's the honest truth. That's the product is papers, because you can't get faulted. You can always get more science papers, right? If you don't build a machine on time, you know, people remember that. So it is a problem. But there it is. There's a business coming. and it's going straight forward. High temperature superconductors is the game changer. Stephen Hawking, before he died, came out and said, no, the high temperature superconductors are going to be the energy miracle. There's private funding coming in. MIT is leading, but they're having to hustle. But that's a great thing, isn't it, for the world? And I bother people at MIT, they're trying to keep the Chinese from finding out what they're doing. And I say, well, would it be bad for the world if the Chinese got there 5 years sooner? I say, well, wait a minute, we're scientists, that's a moral conundrum.
A question.
So, yeah.
High temperature superconductors were, invented, I don't know, about 30 years ago, 25 years ago.
Yeah, well, yeah.
So what's new now suddenly?
Okay, well, two things. One is Bednorz and Miller got the Nobel Prize for doing the copper oxide superconductors, which was a great discovery, all right? And then people have been playing with these cuprates to dope them in different ways, and finally came up with the yttrium, barium, or rare earth barium copper oxide, REBCO. And these are working at higher and higher temperatures, like liquid nitrogen temperature. That's a high temperature superconducting world. Where it will go, I don't know. The fun part is that nobody knows why VCO works. Right? Doesn't fit the standard model for superconductivity.
No, but my question is, you're making it that the high temperature is a game changer, and I would have thought it would be a game changer 25 years ago.
Well,
Isn't it a fabrication
they
process?
weren't particularly high temperature. The other part was fabrication. That's a key thing. If you lay down 1 micron of material, which is basically like the ceramic material, epitaxially, you get something which is completely flexible. So you can wind coils with it and so forth, which you couldn't do with earlier materials. So, by the way, I would like these back if you I promised them that I would bring them back to the lab. So, if you want a little fragment, I've got some little fragments that I can give you to keep. But I need about 4 more of these back. Right? But yeah, this, you'd think that people would have it, but high temperature is relatively, it's still liquid nitrogen temperature, which is
Yeah, well,
a couple hundred degrees. What we need is we need $100 million a year in superconducting work so that we will get the power line down the street superconducting at room temperature or a hot day. Because right now, if I had enough electricity to heat every house in, say, Lexington or whatever, the wires aren't big enough. So, to carry the current. So we need superconductors down the street. And the wonderful part is, nobody really understands how the new things work.
Yeah, it's not so wonderful, actually. But the fabrication, the little label on it says that it gives you 5,000 amps at 4 degrees Kelvin, the liquid helium.
Yeah, helium temperature, yeah.
So what does it give you at liquid nitrogen temperature?
500.
500?
Yeah. The fun part is over at MIT, they're trying to find a power supply that's big enough, because if I've got a superconductor, what voltage does it need? None. So I want 5 or 10,000 amperes for testing purposes at no voltage. Interesting challenge, yeah.
So the spark proposal, I think you said, or I saw on some slide, looked like there was sort of a factor of 2 of electricity out over electricity in.
Yeah.
And presumably it would have to feed back on itself to do,
Well,
to be worthwhile.
Yeah, it doesn't directly feed back, but yeah, the idea is to have a Q of 2, right, which is to say twice as much energy out, well, as you put in, right? That's not enough for a power plant, right? But sure, the Wright brothers only flew for how long? A couple hundred yards. So they intend to prove that you can get net energy from it. Okay? And then the next step is about 5 or 8 years more, is to build ARC. And we want to build a 500 megawatt power plant prototype that really would put significant into the power
has
plant.
any machine produced net?
No fusion machine ever made has ever produced net energy.
Wow.
And that's where you run into it. Talk to any venture capitalist. Well, has anybody ever got net energy? No. But in fact, nobody has built a machine to make net energy either. Spark will be the first one built to make net energy.
So from a pragmatic standpoint, recognizing the politics and all the rest, how do you view the next 5 to 10 years?
Through progressively more dense glasses. No, I think that, I'll tell you, I really, having spent a significant chunk of my life walking around talking about fusion, walking around Capitol Hill talking about fusion, so forth. I think that the next 10 years is going to be really, really exciting. I think that the next 10 years is going to produce net energy. I think MIT is on the way to do that, all right, in 5 to 7 years. I think one of these other wilder ideas may prove to work, because not every good idea comes from MIT. Sorry about that, but it is. And so I think it's here. And not only is it here, it has to be here. You know, people say, well, if this works, and my response is, if is not, you can't allow that in the discussion, right? The world will not survive, right, if it doesn't work. So it's not if, it can't be if.
So is DOE funding the MIT work?
They are funding some parts of the side of it that results in papers.
I mean, does
Work on
Rick Perry
instabilities and
understand does Rick Perry know anything about fusion? Fusion power? I mean, he's not a scientist. He probably doesn't know AC from
Yeah, you
DC.
bring up something which is very, very interesting, right? Because when Rick Perry came on as the Secretary of Energy, so I said, well, and he brought on from people in the Office of Science, so forth, people who were similarly uninformed, right? But yet, the federal government has put more money into fusion research in the last budget than they had here in the previous 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years. Okay? Why? How? Everybody's saying, what happened? Okay? What seems to have happened is that Rick Perry and the other folks didn't know anybody in the fusion game. Right? They, by not knowing anything, they were not tied into what everybody knew. And so they put more money in. Right? They could start relatively from scratch. So I would have said, wrong person. But if you pick the person I would have picked, or MIT would have picked, we'd probably wind up still at the level of, oh, it's 50 years away, nobody ever got that energy. You know, we'll just write papers.
Well, Rick Perry was the governor of a state that produces more wind energy, more electricity from wind energy than any other state. So he's to some extent plugged in.
It is also the state that nearly built the world's largest particle accelerator.
Largest size?
World's largest particle accelerator.
Yeah, right, yeah.
But they got mixed.
Well, I think, I can't explain why it is, but we're very hopeful. I say we, but the community is very hopeful that they can continue to get significant budgets. And how to get significant budgets directed towards building things is another story, because the bureaucrats don't like to be responsible for building things.
So given that the Japanese are putting so much money into the $35 billion case, the ITER case, why wouldn't they be interested in simultaneously funding something at a 10th or a 100th of the cost?
Because to bureaucrats, how could you possibly do better for a 10th of the cost than you're doing now? You mean you want to spend less money and get a bigger result?
Well, no, I was
Look, I'm
thinking
being mean to bureaucrats, but it turns out, it also turns out that ITER is an international agreement. And I talked to somebody from the Department of State, they said, you realize if the US pulled out of the ITER project, which by the way, Lamar Alexander and Dianne Feinstein both consider a failed program, all right, they're in the Senate Appropriations Committee, right? And they both consider it a failed program. So I asked somebody from the Department of State, and said, well, you know, why aren't we out of it? He says, because if we pulled out of that, then the Europeans will pull out of a radio telescope project. And
Yeah, but my question is a little bit different. If you're looking at 35 billion, which means that it might not be 35 billion by the time it started, it might be.
Well, it started at 4.
Well, fine. So if by increasing your budget by a few percent, you could be doing a simultaneous set of experiments with
Well, that's
some rational chance of working. It would seem to be a smart thing to do. Now, I know back when I was in industry, if you had 2 or 3 ways of going ahead and you weren't smart enough to know which one was going to work, at least in the beginning, if one was cheap, you continue that one just in case.
But you're absolutely right. That's the way you do it. And the point is that the amount of money available has not been enough to really do parallel development. And that's how we got going to the moon with parallel development. And I talked to John Holden when he was Obama's science advisor. And I said, you know, this could be done in 10 years. This was some years ago. And he held out his hands. He said, that would require massively parallel development. I said, yes, exactly. And his response was basically, as Americans now, we're not that smart and we don't want to work that hard. That wasn't the words he used, but that was basically the words he used. And Ernie Moniz, I went to talk to him, and he said, well, you could get rid of half the growth by renewables system. I said, what then? And it's a quote, honest. I said, well, what then if you don't do that? He said, and then a miracle happens.
Well, that's what you're describing.
Yeah. Well, it's very hard to redirect major programs. Yeah. And, you know, take the Department of Defense, $750 billion just voted for 1 year, right? If you took 1/5 of 1% of the Department of Defense, that's 1/5 of a percent, right? From the Department of Defense budget, you could gen up fusion research, and all of this would be happening in 3 or 4 years.
One battleship fleet.
No, not a battleship. No, this won't pay to, I think, you know, it's a few airplanes.
Question, what happened to the Princeton Tokamak?
The Princeton spherical tokamak, they got it finished. The idea was to make a tokamak in the sphere, so you didn't have a separate donut. You just had a big chamber like a sphere. And it looked like a neat way to do it. And they fired it up, and it turned out that they had a leak inside the system. Leaked some water or something which killed the vacuum. And so it was not repairable. And so they've torn the whole thing down to start rebuilding it. All right, this is a matter of years. It's questionable whether it will ever run again.
When was that? When did that happen?
It happened about 3 years ago, I think.
One thing I remember, though, was particularly annoying, it seems like, is back in, I think this was in '94, Princeton said they had they had reached break-even energy. In 1994, but the project was canceled later on.
Yeah, well, Princeton had the TFTX experiment, Tokamak fusion, just whatever. Right? And they actually did that with deuterium and tritium. And they got 16 megawatts of energy for a few seconds. All right, but that was, and maybe in the flash, they may have had some extra, but it was 16 megawatts very, very briefly, but it was not potentially sustainable. And then, you're right, and then they said that that's over.
So it cost too much to rebuild something, you mean, so they didn't want to put the money in or something?
But the TFTX was, actually it's been totally disassembled now, and they stopped the program. They had Princeton had a stellarator project. A stellarator is another interesting thing. I showed you a tokamak which had the donut-shaped chamber. It turns out that the particles of the plasma don't really like to fly in circles. Right? They actually like to go, that's figurative, but anyway, about like that. And so somebody said, well, why don't we make the vacuum chamber in that shape? Right? Look it up. It's called a stellarator. Turns out to be inherently stable. Right? You don't have to steer things with it very much. And the Germans have built one. It's called Wendelstein. Does that mean, translate on that, wandering around? I don't know. But anyway, but they built one, and it's not a net energy machine, but people are working with it. And in fact, the Department of Energy is providing funds for American graduate students to go over to Germany, all right, to work with their machines, everything's modern, and they're paying money for people, money so that a Chinese machine can be run by remote control from MIT, because there's no equivalent machine in America. So the idea is between 1 and 3 in the morning in China, somebody in America can diddle a magnetic field in a Chinese machine. It's, it won't stand close examination. Folks, we are getting to the end. I would like to get these pieces back, wherever they've gone.
Did you want these?
The cards you can keep, yeah, you can fight over those.
Pass up those others, please.
And if I could get the other ones back, so that I can return them to
Unwanted
people at
cards.
MIT. Is that
Let's
like
leave them on the table or something.
So you know all about that now.
I'm still short 3. Oh, I just got 3. Look at that. I'm reading back to
By the way, before everybody runs out, there are a few faces here that I don't recognize. And if people are not members of the group, everybody's welcome, of course. But if you're not members of the group, then you don't get mailings and you don't find out what the next meetings are and all the rest. So Charlie Sestakis is our membership guy. But if anybody who's in this room who doesn't normally attend gives me their email address, I will send it, and their name. I will send it over to Charlie and make sure that he sends an invite to you. And for those who are new, who don't know me, I'm John Rudy.
So the next couple of weeks, no meetings?
The next couple of weeks, next week there is a meeting.
There is.
But the following 2 weeks there isn't.
Next week is not. Okay.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
But I want to ask a question. Maybe I missed the cost of these things. And I don't mean the research cost. I mean, if this was possible to have like a production model and they're cranking out, 100 at a time, what would be an estimated cost of the spark versus a hydro?
just basically the same cost of any fossil fuel plant.
About $1 billion per gigawatt.
Well, yeah, well, that'd be $1 a watt.
Yeah.
Okay, something like that. But nobody really knows yet what the cost would be when you start to punch them out. Right? Keeping in mind that the fuel cost becomes negligible, and the demobilization cost is also negligible. And there's no waste problem and so forth. So, if somebody is feeling unhappy because they didn't get to keep a piece, I've got a few 2-inch pieces. Some of you didn't get a card or like it.
I'll take a
Thank you.
You said there's no waste. What about, what about the radioactivity induced by the fusion process?
Yeah, well, it makes neutrons, but they're fast neutrons, which means that they're not good at inducing radioactivity. The chamber will become radioactive, but all the numbers come out to be very, very small.
Chamber, you said, was
And there's no ash. The ash is helium from balloons.
Yeah, so this helium is no different from atmospheric.
No, that's right, or, yeah, except that, of course, there isn't any helium in our atmosphere.
That's the way it always keeps.
So Ryan, thank you very, very much.
Really is.